So in this lesson, we will discuss the empirical research on investment returns, and I will also connect these findings with some real-world data to make the concepts more memorable. With that said, let's get started. So whenever it comes to asset management, there are two major questions that need to be asked, namely, can actively managed funds beat the market? And if yes, is it very likely to do so again in the next year? According to the reading, the answer to both questions tends to be no. And one of the most iconic studies addressing this question was conducted by Michael Jensen in 1969. And of course, many more recent studies have been published since then, while the overall conclusion remains broadly similar. Now, the second question is closely related to the concept of performance persistence. And according to Jensen's findings, the probability that a fund will beat the market in year one is close to 50%. The probability that the fund would beat the market in year 1 and 2 consecutively is 25%, namely 50% on the power of 2. The probability that a fund will beat the market in year 1, 2, and 3 consecutively is thus 12.5%, in other words, 50% on the power of 3. And lastly, the probability of a fund beating the market in year 1, 2, 3, and 4 consecutively is thus 6.25%, in other words, 50% on the power of 4. So, as you can observe, according to Jensen's findings, the persistence of active management doesn't seem to be much different from tossing a coin. A useful way to interpret this 6.25% is that this is approximately 1 out of 16. In other words, if there are 16 actively managed funds, there is a good chance that one of them would beat the market every single year for the last 4 years. Now, the important question, however, is whether this performance reflects genuine skill or simply the result of luck. Now, the reading is also discussing the performance of hedge funds, which is often measured by using the Barclay Hedge Fund Index net return. And from an exam perspective, the key point to understand is that hedge fund databases tend to be largely voluntary, meaning that these are inherently subject to upward bias. And another important aspect with regard to performance is that such performance cannot be interpreted in isolation. Instead, they should be compared with an appropriate market benchmark, and the reading does this by comparing hedge fund returns with the returns of the S&P 500. And as you can observe, there has been an underperformance of hedge funds with regard to the S&P 500, but despite this relative underperformance, hedge fund assets under management have grown significantly over the past several years. Notably, by 2026, the assets under management of hedge funds has reached nearly $6.1 trillion.